Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you jumping on and joining us. Really want the focus of today to be able to give everybody the time to get all of your questions answered, and we will try and give answers based on all the information that we know today. You know, really going back for months, in particular, really going back to November, we have worked to get information and data to the decision makers, which really have been the Office of the Governor, as well as the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The two most pressing questions that I think every person connected to school sports has had now, really going back to mid-November, has been, what are the numbers that are currently preventing us from playing? And then the corollary question to that is, what do the numbers have to look like for us to play? Going back to mid-November, given the escalating daily cases, given the fact that our positive test rate was quite high, we certainly can understand why not just school sports, but many other things went on pause going back to mid-November. You now fast forward a little more than 2.5 months later. Our number of statewide daily new cases is a third of what they were back in mid-November. The positive test rate is now half of what it was then. And so it does beg the question right now of, given those great improvements of those metrics, what are the metrics being used specifically when it comes to school sports? Those are the two questions that we continue to push every day, and that certainly continues. Just know that whenever we've been allowed to play going back in August, if that was certain sports, certain times, we've played, and we've been ready to do that, and that will continue to be our focus. It does bear repeating. I know many of you have these statistics, but I do want to just give them to you one more time because I think these are very instructive. We did partner with Health and Human Services to get our fall sports completed under the rapid testing program. That included just over 5,300 individuals. That was players in those three sports. It was coaches. It was team personnel. And for those football schools, it included sideline cheerleaders. It included those students as well. Just over 5,300 individuals part of the program. 1% of those individuals had a positive test in the 3.5 weeks of the program. At the last data update, we are going to get one final update yet from MDHHS, but at the last report, it was right around 30,000 rapid tests had been completed and reported. In that negativity percentage was 99.8%. So we thought the numbers would be good. The numbers were extraordinarily good. And you have to remember that these were three sports, two of which were exclusively indoor sports. And the reality with football, even though our weather was pretty good, especially on the two Saturday game days, we were outdoors. But many of our football teams were practicing indoors during the week, just given the cold temperatures and the snow. So pretty good snapshot of a full contact sport along with two indoor sports as well. It's important to note that there are 38 other states currently competing in winter sports, and that includes our three geographic bordering states. That's Wisconsin, that's Indiana, that's Ohio. All three of those states have been competing in all of their winter sports. Basketball, two of the states that have ice hockey and wrestling, that's been going on since December the 1st. What's also significant is you look at what their COVID numbers were statewide on December the 1st, and you now take a look at those nearly almost 2 months later, and their daily cases and positive test rates are also lower. So the conclusion that some might draw is, well, no, indoor contact sports during the winter is going to be an impediment to improving COVID numbers in the examples, not just in the three bordering states, but really in other states that are playing across the country have seen the exact opposite. So that's also important to know. One other thing that we can't forget about, it's day 14 of winter practices. Back on January the 16th, all of our winter teams could begin gathering and practicing. Now, certainly in the four contact sports, there hasn't been able to be any physical contact during those workouts. or any competition, but we've been gathering groups of kids and coaches together every day indoors. And now on day 14, the success that we've gotten back from our schools has been incredibly good. I didn't want to use the word positive because I guess with COVID that sends a different message. But the feedback we've gotten now in 2 weeks of practice is just how well winter sport practices are going. And based on the data that I've already shared with you, we just feel like the data now lends itself for us to take the next step. We've tried to be one approach the health department and governor's office liked going all the way back to August was a phased-in approach. And now, again, we've got the data from the pilot program. We've got the data from other states. We now have the actual data from our winter sports over the past 14 days. And we firmly believe that now is the time to take the next step to allow those 4 winter sports, those the competition to also begin immediately as well. So the last thing is I just kind of wrap up our opening here, and then we'll go right to your questions. I have to thank the new director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Director Hertel. I can tell you that the previous 4 days of communication this week with the health department has been better than it probably has been in the previous 4 months. There certainly is a very clear change that communication and dialogue is something that is valued by Director Hertel. We're appreciative of the communication we've had. Now, at some point here, we need decisions to be made, and hopefully those will be made very, very quickly. But to be completely fair, we do need to thank Director Hertel for the communication that we've gotten the last 4 days. So again, as I said, I really wanted today's focus to be a time to where we're going to answer your questions. And with that, I think Andy and I will kind of work together here, and let's jump.
All right,
into
Mark, we have 3 common questions we'll get to first, then we'll go to the chat. First one is, what can MHSA do to help bring contact sport back as quickly as possible?
I think you've, certainly what we continue to do, getting that data and information in front of the decision makers is something that we are continuing to push as aggressively. It's really been going on since really going back to November, but it's certainly taken on, I think, a new intensity and added intensity after last Friday's morning, somewhat unexpected announcement that winter sports, those 4 were at least getting pushed back till the 21st of February. So again, with the change of leadership, which I've talked about, that's been a positive development this week. And then what else is going on outside of us? I need to thank a lot of you, because a lot of our media members have written articles, again, citing the science and the data. Also getting a chance to reach out and connect with our kids and our coaches to tell their story. And that's been very, very important this week. Certainly both chambers of our legislature had hearings in various committees yesterday, and that message and that story, I think, is being told as strongly as it has yet. So it's really it's a collective effort. What you can't forget is you really talk about how big is the school sports community. We've got roughly 1,500 member schools, about 750 high schools, and another 750 junior high middle schools. Each year we have 200,000 kids in grades 6 through 12 that participate in an MHSA sport. You then go and add in the number of coaches, the number of officials, school staff, parents, family members. When it's all said and done, our MHSAA community numbers about 500,000 people. And it's been very reinvigorating this week to see so many within that community really speak out, to really ask those pointed, direct questions of what are the numbers that are preventing us from playing now, and what do the numbers have to look like for us to continue. So in terms of the urgency and where we go next, this week has been productive thus far. Again, we're hoping for some new information and answers from the decision makers very soon. But certainly the entire community's work is hopefully going to bear fruit here very soon.
Maybe touch on that a little bit more, Mark. So what has been your reaction, the MHSA's reaction to yesterday's hearings downtown, and the swell of that public outcry, specifically with the Let Them Play group?
I think overall, the folks within the school sports community are pretty reasonable people. I think we all understood going back to last November when numbers were escalating and skyrocketing, why a pause had to be made. We're responsible people here. We are an organization that is governed and led by educators. We're in this work for what's best for kids. And certainly when you talk about what's best for kids, health and safety has to be the number one topic that comes up. Whenever you talk about health and safety, certainly mitigating as much COVID risk is part of that conversation. But for me, what came out loud and clear yesterday, and I thought the most powerful voices yesterday came from students themselves. It's about health and safety, and certainly COVID's a part of that, but mental health is an awfully big key component of this as well. You look at what our numbers are, you look at what's going on in other states. School-based sports has not been these super spreader events. It certainly wasn't in our experience in the fall and what other states are doing in the winter. That data is simply not there. So I think the most important voices that really won the day yesterday were those from our kids. And they, I think, are showing incredible leadership, in showing an incredible civic duty to where they are trying to hold our government leaders accountable to give us those answers of what are the numbers that are preventing us from playing currently and what do they have to look like for us moving forward. And again, I thought our young people won the day yesterday.
How will spring be affected by what is happening now with the start of winter sports?
That's a good question, and one we probably don't have a definite answer to yet. The start of spring sports, we're now about a month and a half out when the first published day of spring sport practice can begin. The reality is that we need to see exactly when winter sports can start. And really once winter sports, when I say winter sports, it's really all of our winter sports are able to fully compete. Once we now know what that start date is, we can then set the end date in terms of the tournament experience. And then we should also be able to finalize exactly what the spring calendar is going to look like as well. But to do anything right now to spring sports, again, having some uncertainty about when the exact start date of winter is going to be, that's just something that we're going to have to kind of put on hold, at least in the short term.
So I know you've touched on this. We're getting to some of the questions in the chat. What kind of dialogue has there been with MDHHS since this extension in terms of those expectations for cases or numbers?
So we haven't gotten into specifics and numbers yet. What we have been able to do is to try and really make our case to bring the new director up to speed with all of the data and metrics that we've already shared earlier. And so it's really, as much of a surprise as we all were last Friday morning at Ford Field when that announcement at 9:30 came out. The fact that we're having communication ahead of time, that there is dialogue here before hopefully the next set of decisions gets made, that's been a huge step in the right direction. If nothing else, and I'm sure that, folks can criticize me for a lot of things, but not being willing to pick up the phone and to communicate and talk to people, whether it's easy conversations or difficult conversations, that's something that we feel like we do pretty well around here. And thankfully, the new director is kind of sees the world that same way. So that, again, we're hoping that the foundation and the work that's happened here the last 4 days will hopefully bear some results here soon.
There have been some groups that have threatened legal action against the state. Has the MHSA considered taking legal action against the state at any point? Why or why not?
So the legal part of this, and I think you need to be a little bit of a student of history, that under some of these emergency orders, you saw some different groups such as the gym and fitness owners. You saw the restaurant group that went to file legal action and were very unsuccessful. It really, to use a sports analogy, it really didn't even get out of the starting block. So If we're going to be able to get some movement, and given the fact this week that there is now better communication, that we feel like for the first time in a long time that they're looking at the data and they understand the data and they can see how the data can affect future decisions. That's really where we're putting our entire focus right now, because we think that that's going to be a strategy that could get all of us better answers much more quickly than going to the legal route.
What is your confidence level in having a proper winter sports season? Has there been consideration of canceling the winter sports season in order to turn the focus towards spring?
Our goal going back to last July has been 3 seasons, and we still have the opportunity to do that. It is still January. I realize that the runway that normally winter sports has in terms of their starting month and their ending month looks a lot different than it has done before. But don't forget, we also finished some fall championships in the previous 2 weeks here in January that were 2 months later than what they were originally scheduled for in a normal year as well. So the goal is still 3 seasons that all reach the finish line. We have to know when our winter is going to start. We can then set when that finishes. We then set up how that impacts spring, and we'll go from there. It's important to know that, yes, spring lost their entire season last year. We're still looking exactly, once again, we know a winter answer and what the right start date for spring is. Those of you that cover spring sports in our state know that the first month, the biggest issue and story every year is weather. That could a slight delay make some sense. And then the other thing that's important to know is that given our spring sports lost their entire season last year, know that we gave all of our spring sports 16 full squad coach player contact days. So during September and October, during the fall, which by the way, if you're a coach, those afternoons that you can get in September and October are about the best weather that you're going to have to work with your team. Know that we gave all of our spring teams 16 dates where they could bring in their full squads, full workouts, intra-squad scrimmages to try and give those programs some time with their kids, not just from a sport skill perspective, but really for a mental health and relationship perspective. So we have given our spring sports already this school year a little bit of a jump start. And once we know exactly what's going to happen with winter, we can now figure out what the actual spring season will look like here finishing up.
Once we can resume with contact at those practices, how quickly should we expect competition to begin? And realistically, what's a basketball season, length of season, number of games look like?
So I think that all of us, once we do get the go-ahead, the competition can happen very, very quickly within a few days. As many of you know, my wife is currently a high school basketball coach. And over the last, going back to January 16th with practice, I'm not sure that, at least in that case, basketball kids have ever done more running and shooting in terms of getting their bodies in condition and being ready to go than this year. You know, typically we start winter sport practices, scrimmages happen a week later, and then games start soon after that. You know, our winter kids in those contact sports have been 2 full weeks of more physical conditioning than what they would ever get during the course of a normal season. So I think that can happen very, very quickly. In terms of those starting dates, I know a lot of our schools continue to have basketball schedules that were set on the first day of competition happening next Wednesday, which would be February the 4th. Until we get to that date and know exactly what's going on, we're going to keep our tournament dates finishing up in early April at that same spot. So we talked about the runway shrinking for winter, but there still is enough runway left for those 4 contact sports to be able to start quickly, to be able to get those regular season games into where with some creative scheduling, you may end up having about the same number of regular season games that you would in a traditional season. So again, we're just hoping for those decision makers to give some reconsideration and hopefully some good news to everybody involved here very soon.
How do you respond to schools or even individuals leaving their high school programs to go play outside of the state?
Going back to June, we have seen example after example of kids and families are going to go find activity, period. We have been naive to think that, folks are going to stay in their basement and they're not going to go seek that activity. It's happening all the time. It's outside of our control. I've been frustrated at times because I felt like, given the fact that we're organized, that we have accountability in place, our schools are following the rules. Our schools are following the epidemic and emergency orders. You then look in the non-school space, and it looks a little bit more like the Wild West, with far fewer safety protocols and even less accountability. And I think a lot of our school folks are growing incredibly frustrated with what seems to be at least a bit of a double standard in terms of enforcement. So that has been a major frustration of our schools. We know that kids are going out of state each and every weekend to play and to find competition. And ironically, our kids are safest in our programs. If we could allow competition, what that would do in those 4 winter sports is it would keep our kids here in state, that the competition would be a heck of a lot more local than what it is right now. And if we're really serious in our state about either getting kids back in buildings for in-person education, or in those districts that are already doing it, keeping in-person learning going, it would seem to me that the most sense would be to allow school sports to happen, because kids are going to find the activity. Why wouldn't we keep them as local as possible with trained professional educators who have to follow some pretty strict safety procedures that are in place and ultimately are accountable to athletic directors and principals, superintendents, and boards of education? So that's something that we hear on a daily basis from our schools.
The limited team membership rule prohibits students from competing in the same sport and same season with non-school teams. Has there been any consideration of suspending this rule for the winter or spring season?
There's been conversation about that, but again, I think the previous answer about where we're really putting our focus is to get those in decision-making positions to allow our kids to compete and play now. Let's allow competition, but let's keep it as safe and as local as possible. So that's where we're putting all of our focus right now. When our board did meet earlier this week, we did talk about limited team membership. We're in very frequent communication with our board, and that's something that we'll continue to look at as things evolve and change relative to both winter and spring with limited team membership.
Has Governor Whitmer's office or MDHHS given us any reason as to why we don't have a seat at the table for these discussions?
Not from the governor's office. And like I said, we've had more communication with the Director of Health and Human Services in the last 4 days than we had with the previous director over the previous 4 months. So in terms of a seat at the table, the way that, I feel like we've been included the last 4 days is a huge step in the right direction, and we're very grateful to the new director for that. Again, at some point, communication and dialogue is good, but don't be mistaken that we're also here pressing for answers and decisions as quickly as possible.
Do you think any of the delay in winter season is tied to anything to do with the pilot program for rapid testing? Do schools need to get some rapid tests in their hands, or can winter sports take place without those rapid tests?
We're hoping that they can take place without the rapid test. Again, when you cite the other states, no one is rapid testing those numbers. What we heard during the pilot program was how valuable a resource these rapid tests were, that they're in demand in a lot of other sectors right now in our state. Everybody needs to know that there are 60,000 winter athletes. It's about 40,000 basketball players. We're talking about 9,000 wrestlers, about 8,000 competitive cheerleaders, and about 2,700 to 3,000 ice hockey players. I think those are ballpark numbers, but we're talking roughly 60,000 kids. And into rapid test, remember, in the pilot program, we were talking 5,300 individuals. The scale of rapid test that could be done quite easily with 5,300 kids. When you now take that to 60,000 individuals and you're talking about testing multiple times during a week, that obviously brings about a number of logistical challenges. And, you know, based on what the rapid testing showed from that very small group of 5,300, is we're talking negative test rates of 99.8%. So I think if, you know, the numbers would have been a little bit worse with the rapid testing, that, you know, there were a lot more positive cases out there than what we believe, then you might look at testing a little bit differently. But that's what we hear from the 38 other states, that their numbers of COVID cases and the positive test rates have decreased since they have been indoors competing going back to November. And that is information that we continue to share.
There are a couple questions about how late we would consider delaying, pushing back winter sports so we can still have championships, and how that might affect the championships then in the spring.
That we're taking literally on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Know that a lot of our schools have schedules in place that were based on hockey games starting on February 1st, basketball games starting on February the 4th, wrestling and competitive cheer beginning on February 8th. We're not to those points yet. So that I think should continue to be where our schools keep their schedules. And here over, you know, the coming days, I realize that that first key date is next week, but you know, we need to see where the conversations continue to go and what our decision makers ultimately decide.
A follow-up to the rapid testing line of questioning. In your conversations with the new director, Hertel, have there been any expression of a desire or likelihood of extending that pilot program to winter, spring sports? Is this something schools should be talking about? How cost prohibitive is this?
There haven't been any conversations about testing in winter sports, much less spring sports to date. Certainly what the current order does allow is for, you know, contact sports to go on if a school follows the rapid testing program. And what they have heard loud and clear is, and concern that we have, is if now the schools that can go out and either buy the test, afford the test, they could be able to go forward and play, and those schools that don't have those financial means would get left behind. And so the thing with testing, if it would be on a school-to-school basis, that could create some real issues with inequity. And that is something that, again, we want all of our schools to be able to be on an equal footing, that we believe that given the data and the numbers, that it is safe to play, and it is safe to play now. And that's where our focus continues to be.
Have you been given any hint of what those numbers need to be? We haven't, you've said the 99.8% negative rate to those antigen tests. Is that not enough, or do we have any kind of idea of what number it needs to be?
I've not been given a number in any way, shape, or form.
Let's talk about officials. Are there any concerns about the number of officials for the boys and girls basketball tournaments in the season at the same time? And does that overlap of spring, a potential overlap of spring, does that become a bigger challenge for us?
Officials are always a challenge, especially given the fact that over the last 4 years pre-COVID, our numbers had been going down because, frankly, in good economic times, that's when we struggle with the overall number of officials. Our officials numbers go up and down. There's a very close correlation with economic times. Now, we are going to get some new officials here coming out of COVID, just because of the economic impact that this has had on so many. There are going to be a lot of individuals that are looking for some, you know, an additional job, extra income to pick up. But the problem is that, yes, we're going to get some new officials here in the short term. It takes time to get them trained and prepared and up to speed. Schools are going to need to be creative. I know that at the varsity level in many corners of our state, 3-person crews have become the norm. There are going to be some parts of our state that, given the number of officials, they might be working some games with 2-person, or if it's a double header, one varsity game followed by another, or it might even be a case of a JV game followed by a varsity game, where in the past they would bring in 2 separate crews of officials. It may be a case now that you're going to have the same crew that are going to be working double headers or back-to-back games. That's something that we're right now looking at for all of our districts in the district basketball week. If we're able to go with 3-person crews, it may be a case that on at least the first 2 nights, on Monday and Wednesday, when you've got the most games going on, very well in the gym, you could have the same 3-person crew working both games of the doubleheader. That's something a lot of officials have done for a long time in certain parts of our state, but just know that when it comes to officials, like everything else, we'll continue to be as creative as we can to make schedules work.
From those conversations you've had with MDHHS, do you think there's any potential, this is a couple people have asked it, any potential of starting the contact winter sports season before February 21st?
That's part of the discussion. And the ball is in MDHHS's court, and we'll see what kind of answer we get to that question.
So as I go through these questions, if you don't feel like we've gotten your question answered, there's a lot of questions that are very similar. So we're trying to just hit them at a couple at a time here. If you don't feel like your question's been answered, go ahead and still put it down at the bottom of the chat. One question I've been asked by some coaches and families as to why Mark did not take part in yesterday's hearings.
Mark doesn't have a problem being quoted or getting my face and our message out there. If I would have testified, that could have potentially taken a spot for a school superintendent, a school administrator, a parent, and most importantly, a student athlete. So our message, again, we have a megaphone, and much of that is due to your help in the media to be able to share the numbers and the data that we have. We did have one of our board members that did testify yesterday. Again, we just felt like it would have been more powerful coming from someone who is working in a school each and every day, working with kids directly each and every day. So certainly, those that testified, we had several that reached out. They had asked for some data and the numbers. We have shared that. But again, yesterday's focus, that was a chance for other voices to be heard. And I thought everyone, the school folks, the parents, and most importantly, the student athletes really won the day yesterday.
I think I saw this twice. You aware of the Let Them Play lawsuit being held back because of negotiations with MDHHS?
I have no information on that whatsoever. I've not been aware of their litigation. That's new information to me.
Once we do start playing again, will there be masks during gameplay? Will fans be allowed in the gyms?
So in terms of masks, I can just answer that based on the current order, that if we're able to go forward and the current order stays the same, the answer to masks would be yes. Andy, what was the second part of the question with masks?
Spectators, number of spectators.
So spectators have been spelled out. That actually got some increased definition last week, Friday. Currently, when it comes to winter, I believe the order sets that limit at 100. It does talk about, I believe, if an arena is larger than 10,000 people, that number could be as high as, I think it's 500. But those spectator answers, again, our focus is getting our kids playing first. And once they're given the go-ahead for that, then spectator guidance will be based on whatever the current order is.
What would happen if you simply ignored the governor's and MDHHS order and began the winter contact sports season now?
As a organization and association of member schools, many of which are public schools, that would put ignoring current law would put many of our school districts in a very difficult position. So as much as we've been frustrated about, really the way that things have gone since August, at the end of the day, we have had to follow all of, up until October, the governor's executive orders, and the same goes with MDHHS emergency orders.
Governor Whitmer recently told a Detroit TV station that sports could resume in the coming weeks or days. Your reaction to that?
Really no reaction.
Okay. This is the last one I see in here. We'll see if any others come in. Is this an all or nothing situation? Is a sport like wrestling considered more at risk? Do all 4 sports need to be given the green light by the MDHS for the MHSA to proceed?
Well, right now, the limitations that MDHHS has created is specifically identified the 4 contact sports. So all of our communication right now is focused on those 4 sports. Remember that boys swimming and diving, bowling and gymnastics, those are all a full go right now, those 3 other winter sports. But right now it's been HHS that's put the 4 contact sports kind of in their own category or group. And all of our conversation and our push is focusing on all 4 of those sports as a group. None of those have been pulled out individually yet.
Mark, I think we've gone through all the questions, and so we're going to wrap things up here. If anyone needs to get a hold of us, you know how to touch base with Jeff, GEOFF@MHSA.com. One last question. You touched on this earlier. Any consideration for allowing schools to play outside of the state?
Again, if we're trying to do everything that is responsible for schools to have kids in the building during the school day, competition needs to be local. It needs to be within our state. And while going out of state might make sense for Monroe or for Ontonagon, for those schools near the borders and allowing that, what's Alpena supposed to do? You want to talk about, putting some schools at a real disadvantage. If we said, well, you can go ahead and compete, but it has to be out of state. The inequity that's going to create based on where schools are geographically just brings on a whole new set of problems. So we feel like the best tact here is to advocate for letting all schools play now in our state, rather than have folks fleeing to the 3 bordering areas each weekend.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to wrap it up there. We'll be posting this. If you need a link to this, reach out to Jeff, GEOFF@MHSA.com. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate